Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co-host and dear friend, Jacob LaQuire. We have a lot to get into today, but as a Panthers podcast, we are going to do the little bit of news that we have relating to the Panthers, and that is that Jimmy Lake, the Atlanta Falcons defensive coordinator, was fired this past week. So it gets added to the collection of the Carolina Reaper, aka Bryce Young, where he has gotten Arthur Smith fired, Daniel Jones benched and cut, Dennis Allen fired, and has ruined the playoff hopes this past year of the Arizona Cardinals and the Atlanta Falcons. So pretty nice repertoire. Hopefully we'll add more to the collection next season. Are there any thoughts that you have about this? Jimmy Lake didn't score terribly high in my defensive play caller rankings all year, ranking towards the bottom. I believe he finished in the 20s, but it was a lackluster defense, but it also didn't have a ton of talent. So it's one of those things it's a give and take, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's looking at that and then kind of comparing it to Carolina, right? How Ejiro Evero is still here with definitely a worse defense. Maybe it's just because the Falcons had expectations that they were going to go to the playoffs. They trade for Matthew Judon. I think, didn't they sign Justin Simmons as well? Like in July or something. It was like way past regular free agency. So they're like, maybe these are the defensive pieces we need. Obviously didn't work out that way. And it is what it is. Maybe if they use the number 8 overall pick on a defender, things might be different. But it seems like they have their QB for next year at least. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, I think Kirk Cousins will be a cut candidate potentially, and Michael Penix will be kind of the starter moving forward. And you'll see kind of, I think, the Denver Broncos blueprint with how they've restructured their roster around Bo Nix. Getting into other kind of hiring news, Mike Vrabel over the weekend was hired by the New England Patriots to become their new head coach. And it seems like Robert Kraft is kind of stuck in a rut. And we saw this prior to him hiring coach Bill Belichick with the whole Pete Carroll conundrum. For me, this just smells of familiarity, that he's not willing to go out of his comfort zone and maybe try something new. It seems like he wants a defensive head coach that has prior playing experience, particular for the New England Patriots. And I understand those relationships mean a lot, especially for the owner, and bringing in somebody that's responsible for $1 billion organization. But I just don't know if Vrabel is going to be that guy. Retreads don't tend to pan out, and the retreads that do have, I think, a pedigree that was a cut above Mike Vrabel's. Best example is being Andy Reid, Sean Payton. You could even argue Mike McCarthy with his second stint with the Cowboys. I just don't think Vrabel is in those tier of coaches to warrant this decision.
Yeah, Jim Harbaugh as well. Playoffs first year coming back to the NFL from Michigan. But you're talking about a player that has played there before, familiarity with the organization, all pro or like high accolades. They just had a guy like that in Gerard Mayo, and they let him go after one season. I don't see like the huge turnaround here. Like if they want to stay with the Patriot way, and I have my own thoughts about the Patriot way and how I think they kind of need to move away from it, because a large part of it to me was Tom Brady. Like he was the Patriot way, and obviously they don't have him anymore. But I think if you want to have like the familiarity there and just keep everything status quo, so to speak, I think you could have kept Gerard Mayo for another season. I think this roster was not a good litmus test for what any coach was able to do. It was very clearly one of the like least talented rosters in the league. But at least they have their QB now. Mike Vrabel has experience taking a team to the playoffs. One year, I think it was 2019, maybe 2020. The Tennessee Titans were the 1 seed in the AFC, and they had demolished all the good teams in the regular season. Like they beat the Ravens, the Bills, the Colts, the Chiefs that year. Like they were a very good team. So certainly he has the experience to get them into the playoffs. But yeah, he's not an Andy Reid like you're saying. He's not a Sean Payton or even a Mike McCarthy. Even though I have my gripes with him, took the Cowboys to the playoffs for 3 straight years. So I don't really see it here. I think the writing was on the wall when we saw how quickly he was hired. He was the first hire of the cycle. no other team's even close yet. Like I don't think we have a list of finalists for any other team so far, and there's 6 other options now that McCarthy is out of Dallas. But it seems very rushed. It seems like Robert Kraft knew he wanted Vrabel, and if he knew he wanted Vrabel, I think he had the opportunity last year to get him. But maybe Belichick said, "Hey, if I'm moving on, like if I'm gonna quote retire instead of you firing me, you have to have Jerod Mayo in place." I don't know, but it's certainly rushed, is how I would put it. And then the only positive I would spin on it is Vrabel nailed both of his offensive coordinator hires when he was in Tennessee. So hopefully he gets a good guy to pair with Drake May, because I think we're both big fans of Drake May, and looking forward to what he can do for them in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. You always get one of those situations, though. If you find one of those good play callers, they're going to get hired as a head coach, and then you don't have them in the building, and you got to get a whole new offense installed or promote internally. And we've seen how that's gone for several teams across the league, where you have a very promising team and coaching staff, and you lose some of those pieces, and it's just not quite the same anymore. So that'll be.
And to your point, we saw it with Vrabel in Tennessee,
Mhm.
both LaFleur and Arthur Smith. And granted, Arthur Smith wasn't a great head coach, but he was a very good play caller for Tennessee. And then eventually that led to Vrabel's kind of collapse as the head coach there. So you're right. I think if a young OC comes in and like Drake May catches fire, they might lose him. So you run the risk of that as well.
Yeah, and you would have kind of protected yourself from that element had you hired a guy like Ben Johnson, a Liam Cohen, an offensive coordinator that is particularly well versed in the play calling aspects. This isn't a guy that's an offensive assistant head coach. This is the guy calling the plays into the huddle that has a kind of structure about going about figuring out the defense and putting points on the board. And that's, I think, what the Patriots will miss. We'll see if they're able to kind of pull off what the Bills have done with Sean McDermott and Josh Allen. I think Vrabel will probably have a better defense than Jerod Mayo. I thought we saw evidence of that not only in his time with Tennessee, but Mayo's first year with New England. Despite the injuries and the lack of talent that Bill Belichick had to work with last year, his defense was night and day, like superior, better than what Mayo put on the field this past year, despite having Christian Gonzalez all year and a young budding star on the defensive line. I want to. It's not
Keon White.
Yeah, I was like Christian Barmore was in my head, but
Barmore
he's had
missed
the injury.
most of the year this year, and that certainly plays a factor. And I think one positive thing to look about the Vrabel hiring is that, again, the Patriots will have a ton of cap space. Again, they're going to have I think it's the 4th overall pick. Yeah, like so they'll have premium assets to build this team in the way that Vrabel wants to build it. So I think they will improve. Like they can't be any worse, I think, than they were this past year, especially with Drake May coming into his own in his first full season as a starter. Again, he came off the bench for the first, I think it was 4 games this season until Jacoby Brissett suffered the concussion. Any more thoughts on Vrabel before we move on to the other Mike that is in the news as of yesterday? Because, well, he was in the news throughout the whole cycle, but in typical Cowboys fashion, they like waiting till the very last minute, and they couldn't get a deal done with Mike McCarthy officially yesterday, and his contract officially ends today. So they waited till the exact last minute, couldn't get it done, and now Mike McCarthy is a coaching free agent. You don't really think of coaches as free agents. They're either like fired or on a team, but he can talk to whoever he wants now.
He can. I know the Chicago Bears requested why he was still under contract to interview him. The Cowboys denied that. And there were contract negotiations going down. It seemed like both sides had an interest in returning kind of to the status quo. And this was something we had talked about last offseason. Do you let Dak and Mike McCarthy kind of write out their deals and then just start fresh? Do you kind of perpetuate what they've had and hopefully one of these years you get lucky? In this case, they decide to part ways. Like we talked about with Mike Vrabel, now this Mike McCarthy, both are retread head coaches. I think McCarthy is actually a really good head coach. Is he the most innovative offensive play caller you're going to see? No, but he's really good at designing ways to get playmakers the ball. So if he were to go to Chicago, you're going to see DJ Moore and some of their stars on offense get fed a lot more in ways that benefit them. If he were to go to Jacksonville, which could be on the table, I don't think they've requested an interview, but I think he could get a lot out of Trevor Lawrence and Brian Thomas. And then with New Orleans, Derek Carr is still in the books. We've seen how he's worked with veteran quarterbacks with Dak Prescott and Aaron Rodgers. Could probably get a lot out of him. And then use a guy like Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed to generate big plays, explosives. And that's really sometimes what turns the momentum in a game. So I think wherever he lands, if he becomes a head coach this head coaching cycle, he'll be good. I think Mike McCarthy is a guy that can turn a franchise around. Is he a guy that can put you over the top? I don't know. He obviously did it in Green Bay back with Aaron Rodgers back in 2010. We just haven't seen him replicate it since.
That's 15 years ago now. I just thought about that. That's crazy to think about. And I have my own gripes with McCarthy. Like the lack of playoff success is something that I don't like. I can't get past it. But he gets wins in the regular season. And a lot of these teams that you're talking about, the Jags, the Bears, they don't get wins in the regular season. So I think he would be like a market improvement, especially in Chicago, like you're talking about. I think he would do not wonders, but he could help Caleb Williams maybe not continue down the path, as you put it, of the greatest bus ever. Like that might be his potential. I think he could turn that around because they have the tools there in Chicago, but I think the offense needs a lot more structure than what they were getting with both Thomas Brown and with Shane Waldron in the early part of the season. On the other side of this, though, Dallas needs a head coach now, right? And we know how eccentric the Jones family is with their preferences and stuff like that. I know Billy Marshall, one of the hosts of the Roar podcast, a very good Panthers podcast in its own right, mentioned Jason Witten as like a surprise head coaching candidate there, and like how Jerry he thinks outside of the box sometimes. Don't be surprised if Jason Witten's a guy. Somebody reported that Deion Sanders has mutual interest. Again, a former Cowboys superstar there. I don't know if those are going to be who the Cowboys look at. And then, like, you got to mention a Ben Johnson, too, or a Liam Cohen, or one of these young offensive play callers. I think there's more – I don't know if there's more stability, but I think there is more stability, actually, in an organization like the Cowboys as opposed to the Jaguars, who Shad Khan has hired and fired a ton of coaches and kept the GM. Or Chicago, where they're in a perpetual cycle of fire coach, fire GM, and repeat. Maybe the Cowboys with a guy like Dak Prescott who's there, with CeeDee Lamb who's under contract, maybe that's more appealing to one of these young offensive head coaches. Like, where are you leaning for the Cowboys head coaching search?
So there's going to be a give and take. You obviously have some level of stability. We saw it with Jason Garrett. We saw it with Mike McCarthy. This is a front office, regardless of the faults that you can put on them, that is willing to see the process out. And I think that's good for any coach coming in, especially if it's a first-time head coach and you're trying to learn the ropes, get your system in place, build the roster that you kind of feel like kind of fits the mold, the vision that you have for the team. That's where you're going to have the issues is butting in. Is you may not have final roster say. That may be the Joneses say. And so that can kind of be the disparity. But I don't think you're going to have final roster say in Jacksonville. You might not in Chicago, depending on who the head coach is there. I think outside of Ben Johnson, who is reportedly willing to work with Ryan Poles, I don't know what that kind of dynamic would look like. And those are things to monitor. But going to Jason Witten, this player coach, or Deion Sanders, this player coach, like a former player turned head coach, is not something that works well. And we just saw it with Gerard Mayo, unless that ex-player or former player has a lot of like coordinator experience, where we talk about Mike Vrabel. He coached as the defensive coordinator for several years, far apart from Bill Belichick. Never even coached under Bill Belichick. Was obviously under the tree, coached with Bill O'Brien for the Houston Texans. But there were layers to where you moved up the ranks. You learned how to coach an NFL team. And I don't think Deion Sanders is there. I don't think Jason Witten is there. And we saw it with Jeff Saturday. We saw it with Gerard Mayo. And we're going to see it every single time we see a player former player that becomes a head coach, if they have not gone through the ranks, their chances of success are slim to none.
Yeah, I think about Ron Rivera, right? Former player, but he spent decades as a coordinator
Decades. Like
before
he was
becoming
the
the
Bears
Panthers head
defensive
coach.
coordinator in '06 in the Super Bowl. And then after he parted ways, he coached a few more years as a defensive coordinator. So it's just like I don't understand why these owners think that this player is just going to automatically morph into this like genius coach. Like that takes time.
Yeah, and certainly I think Coach Prime has built programs in college, but the last program builder that was hired to the NFL, you might remember him. His name was Matt Rule, and that one didn't work out too well. I think we're still feeling the after effects of that one. I think we mentioned that McCarthy has meetings with the Saints and the Bears. The Bears meeting is actually tomorrow. That'll be Wednesday, the January the 15th. So we'll have to see where that goes. I expect him to. I think he'll land a head coaching gig at some point during this cycle because we still have 6 openings, and if you imagine that Ben Johnson is one of them for sure, that leaves 5 other spots, and I think he's going to be one of the more appealing candidates to a lot of teams in this cycle.
Yeah, no, if you're a poverty franchise and you need a baseline, I think he's going to provide that as a head coach. And sometimes that's what you need. I know with like Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh, and I don't know if we've talked about this on the pod necessarily. And we'll probably get more into this when we talk about the playoff matchups. But it's one of those situations where you look at like Tony Dungy with Tampa Bay for so long. Great team, great defense, but you couldn't get over the hump. And that seems to be the issue with Tomlin in Pittsburgh. And you wonder, okay, do you bring in this like hot offensive head coach? And I think that can be the process with a guy like Mike McCarthy is maybe he's not the guy that gets you to the promised land. But if he can build continuity, he can build an NFL team, you can fire him and bring in somebody else that'll get you that extra nudge. So when the Bucks fire Tony Dungy, you trade for a head coach and John Gruden, who's able to take you to the promised land. And so that's why I think some of these teams that are in this limbo of being a really, really good team and wanting to become a championship caliber team, that's the switch that I think a lot of teams are more hesitant to make because they're okay with just being successful, not shooting for champion.
For sure. Sometimes you have to go with maybe not outside of the box, but maybe someone who's more of a radical candidate or is seen like that. And I think the perfect example is with the first playoff matchup that we saw. Jim Harbaugh, a lot of teams, one of them I know being the Panthers, didn't want to work with him because he wanted all the control, right? He wanted to be the final voice. And a lot of owners and GMs aren't going to go with that, but the Chargers did. And in year one, he took him from, I don't remember what they were, like 6-11 last year or something, to the playoffs in his first year. And obviously they didn't win that game. I don't think Houston won that game either. I think the Chargers just lost it for them. This was probably one of the worst mid-offs we've seen in quite some time between two QBs here. And I don't want to put Stroud in like the way dumpster bottom of the barrel tier that Herbert was in this game, but both of these QBs didn't play well. The very first play of the game, this isn't on Stroud. I'm just saying, like, the very first play of the game was a defensive takeaway for Los Angeles. And then Stroud would have a couple of turnovers. Justin Herbert had 4 interceptions. This was not good QB play. And I think when we talked about this matchup, we keyed in on, hey, the Chargers defense could have an advantage over the Houston Texans offense because the Texans offense has been quite bad recently. And I think they weren't great in this game, but it was the Texans defense that took advantage of a bad QB for the Chargers in this game, and ultimately it costed them.
Yeah, it did. I think the blueprint was probably laid out in the Atlanta Falcons game a couple weeks ago, where if Kirk Cousins doesn't throw 4 or 5 interceptions himself, the Chargers probably don't win that game. And so the Texans, they held Josh Allen to, I think it was like 9 of 30 for less than 200 yards. It was like barely 150. And you saw just how much confusion they were able to put an elite MVP candidate in earlier in the year. I think a lesser quarterback with lesser talent around him was going to struggle, and we didn't see the writing on the wall. The Texans are 6-2 now, I think, all time in the wild card round. I think last week when I was on air, I was saying like, oh, we typically see the Texans falter, and that is true. They're 0-5 currently in the divisional round. They have lost over the past decade, a little bit more than a decade, but it's been twice to the Baltimore Ravens, twice to the New England Patriots, and now this is their second matchup with the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, the 2019 game we all remember with Deshaun Watson and the Texans going up 24-0, just for the Chiefs to come back and rally and completely mollywop them. And it went to show just how good Mahomes and Andy Reid were at that time. But it's just, I don't see the narrative changing, and we'll get more into that Thursday. But this is a team with the Texans where it's like, okay, you're better than some of these teams that are fringe playoff teams, these wild card teams. But when you start playing some of the more serious title contenders, this team has never been able to get over the hump. The Texans I don't think they haven't made it to a conference championship, and they definitely haven't made it to a Super Bowl. And I think when you have Stroud on a rookie contract, you have to reevaluate the building process you had on the offensive side this past offseason, and you got to find the way to add more talent around Stroud, because the defense is legit. The defense is worth kind of building around getting to the Super Bowl. But this offense, between the offensive line, Stroud's lack of confidence, the lack of accuracy, and the lack of playmakers outside of Nico Collins, like those are things that they're going to have to address, even though that they have advanced.
Yeah, they kind of went all in this past offseason. I think that they thought that, hey, we're doing the right thing, and obviously didn't pan out. You can't plan for Stephon Diggs to miss the rest of the season and Tank Dell to miss a big chunk of the season. Nico Collins missed, I think, 3 games as well. You can't really plan for that, but still, they're going to have to fix it. And on the flip side with the Chargers, even though they lost, like I think it's kind of reverse when you're looking at futures here. I think the Chargers can easily continue to build off what they did in year 1 of Jim Harbaugh. The plan was simple, right? It was to fortify the trenches on both sides, keep Herbert upright, and win like that. And now that they've done that, Ladd McConkey looks really good. They just have to add some weapons there, and I think the offense can be rolling. I think on defense, they found a lot of contribution from later drafted rookies this year. And if they're able to continue to do that, maybe replace Khalil Mack, who I believe is unrestricted free agent this season, if they can replace his production, I think they'll be right back in the playoffs again next year. It is a tough division, though, because Kansas City and Denver's emergence. We'll talk a little bit more about Denver real quick here in a minute. But as far as the Chargers go, I think they have a brighter future than the Texans, despite them being knocked out of the playoffs earlier.
Yeah, I think their future is a lot brighter. This is a team that had a top 5 pick last year, and they made it to the playoffs. It's obviously the first time in Jim Harbaugh's career where the team that he took over, the first time that they're in a playoff or bowl game or whatnot, that he hasn't won. And so I think it was definitely a little disheartening, but they're going to go back to the drawing board. They'll figure out what they need to fix. I think Tom Telesco's Quentin Johnston pick set this franchise back, because if you had drafted a Zay Flowers, a Jordan Addison, and you pair that with Ladd McConkey and Joe Alt and the offense that they've built, I think you're really only a piece or two away, but you still got to get that other wide receiver to pair with Ladd McConkey. You probably still need to fix the interior of the offensive line. They're just things that will definitely be addressed moving forward, but that's what's going to help propel them from being this fringe wild card team to potentially winning the AFC West. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, but if you want to kind of be fighting with the big boys, there are a couple more moves they need to make, and we'll get into that more into the offseason. But like you said, future's bright, and I think it's a good time to talk about the Pittsburgh-Baltimore game, because the losing team on that game with the Steelers, it just feels like they're in this perpetual rut. We talked about this a little bit before we got on this, but Mike Tomlin, it's like he can get you 10 wins. He can get you to the playoffs, but he hasn't had a franchise quarterback since Big Ben retired, and they've just been cycling through guys. Drafted Kenny Pickett. They drafted Mason Rudolph. They signed Russell Wilson. They signed Justin Fields. And none of these guys are the franchise cornerstone. And I think until they figure that out, or they make a change in the front office, head coach, I like what Omar Khan's done. I love Mike Tomlin, but something's got to give at some point for the Steelers to advance past the wild card.
Yeah, I would be careful because I know a lot of Steelers fans are calling for Tomlin to be fired. I'd be very careful with that because, like, just look at the Panthers, man. What would you give to have 10 wins every year and make the playoffs every year? Like, we've never experienced consistency like that. And when you look at it from that perspective, it's like, oh man, the Steelers are, you're right, they have a consistent floor of winning. That's their floor. And if they can get the QB right, I think they have a chance. But obviously, they've taken swings, a lot of swings, and missed on all of them. I don't think, honestly, I thought that they exceeded my expectations this year with Russell Wilson and Fields, but they're gonna have to get that QB pick right. They have the if I'm looking at it right, the 21st pick in the draft this year, and I'm not a big fan of any of the QBs in this draft, to be honest. So I'm not sure that that's the route to go, but like they just have to get it right because they're matching up against a guy who is probably going to win the MVP this year in Lamar Jackson. They have to match up against a guy like Joe Burrow, and if they keep Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, that offense is going to be nuclear every year. They have to match up with, and I know the Browns don't have their QB either, but Myles Garrett is going to end up rushing them every single game that they play. So they're in a tough division, and until they get that QB pick right, it's going to be stagnation, and stagnating at 9 to 10 wins every year seems like a good thing, like for fans like us on the outside looking in, but a lot of those fans are fed up with it. And I'm sure people in the Steelers organization are like, we need to win a playoff game. It's been almost a decade since we've won one. Our time has to come now.
Yeah, no, it would be frustrating when you're a team that's used to winning at least a couple playoff games. Like if Mike Tomlin over the past 10 years had won a couple more games and not just lost. I think he's on like a 5-game losing streak right now in the wild card round. And that does leave a bad taste in your mouth because it's like, okay, so we're going to do this thing where we either start the season off super hot and then fade down the stretch, or we start slow, we rally back, make the playoffs, and you play like the 2 or the 3 seed, and then you get smacked. And so, again, I don't know what needs to change, but they definitely need to address the quarterback position and sooner rather than later before Mike Tomlin is moved on from. I don't know if it would be a possibility to trade him, get trade assets back. We saw a trade involving Sean Payton a couple years ago, and that's paid off for the Denver Broncos. Maybe there's a team that feels like they just need a leader in the building, and you're able to make a negotiation work there, and the Steelers are able to start fresh. But like you said, grass isn't always greener on the other side. A guy that's been able to get you a minimum of a winning record every single season he's been there is unheard of. So to replicate that isn't going to be easy. So the Steelers need to hold on to what they have unless something better presents itself. Moving on to a coach that I just mentioned. Actually, no, I don't know why we're skipping over this game. Ravens absolutely destroyed them. Lamar, Derrick Henry. We're just talking about like coach and next season implications. But there was a play where Lamar Jackson on a read option hands it to Derrick Henry, but you can see 3 Steelers, Minkah Fitzpatrick being one of them, all lined up directly looking at Lamar, spaced out like 5 yards behind each other, as if to stop that play because of how good he is, how much control he has on the field. And then that opens it up to where Derrick Henry's literally got a wide open rushing lane, which he's never had in his entire career. So to be able to then get to the second level and then just bulldoze and do what he does best, this is an offense that is going to be hard to stop for Buffalo next week. And there's a reason why they're in the playoffs. There's a reason why Lamar is probably going to win his 3rd MVP. And it's just because they are hard to stop. And the Steelers were a good defense all year. I weren't able to put the brakes on them. It will be interesting to see if anything changes next week. What were some of the key takeaways you took away from this game? Similar to the Houston Texans Chargers game, this just wasn't super exciting. It was kind of over by halftime. The meat and potatoes, I think, really came on Sunday.
Yeah, this is stuff we've never seen before. The one read option you're talking about, Lamar's pulling Pro Bowlers. So it was Minkah Fitzpatrick, I think it was Patrick Queen, and I don't remember if it was Alex Highsmith or TJ Watt. But these are the people he's pulling on these read options to give Derrick Henry the running lane there. I know a lot of people want to discredit Lamar for having Derrick Henry on the team. It's like, oh, how good Derrick Henry's doing. He's doing this for him with this, like these kind of things. You're right. Derrick Henry's never seen a lane like that. When he was on the Titans, they loaded up 11 in the box because they knew that's what was going to happen. And with Lamar being able to pull these guys away, just makes them incredibly deadly. This was without Zay Flowers, this game, and they went up a quick 21-7 lead. Obviously, it ended 28-14 there, but the Ravens were in complete control this whole game. I am very excited to watch the Buffalo and Baltimore game this upcoming weekend. I think it's the night game on Sunday, as it should be. It's like the game of the week, and really looking forward to it. And I think that's a good segue into the Buffalo versus Denver game. Denver, you talked about it. This is a team that traded for a coach. At the time, I clowned it. I'm like, why would you ever trade for a coach? This is it ended up being a first-round pick, right? That went to the Saints. That was the pick that was traded like 5 different times because it was like the 30th overall pick because it started with I think that was part of the Trey Lance deal. Yeah, to Miami.
Yep, so went to the Dolphins.
Traded it to Denver for Bradley Chubb. And that ended up back to the Saints, who didn't have a first-round pick because, remember, they traded up for Trevor Penning the year prior. The Saints finally got it was Olave and Penning.
Brian Brissett? No, that was
Brian Brissett. It turned into Brian Brissett. Yeah. But yeah, they traded a pick for him. It ends up working out in year 2 because nothing was going to work out with Russell Wilson last year. And that gives Mike Tomlin even more credit. He made it work with Arthur Smith and Russell Wilson. But onto Denver, I thought they had a chance in this one on that first drive. It was like, oh my gosh, they're coming, they're throwing haymakers, and then it was over. Like they just couldn't handle what Buffalo was like giving them on offense. Josh Allen had another great performance, even though he didn't find the end zone. I think what he was able to do, moving them down the field, getting James Cook in position to score there, throwing the ball, getting that one 4th down touchdown was just phenomenal. I'm not so sure it was a touchdown, but they called it like that, and ended up being a crazy play. But they were really in control for most of the game. I don't think there's a ton to say about Buffalo, but when we look at it from Denver's perspective, I saw somebody tweet like, "Why are they calling this game as if Bo Nix is a bad QB?" I think you just kind of answered it yourself. Bo Nix is not like a talent elevator. He's just the system guy. And this is what I was talking about like pre-draft last year, Steve, when I said, hey, the Broncos need a QB, and Bo Nix seems like a Sean Payton guy. I thought it was going to be in the 2nd round, but they obviously take him at pick it was 12 or 13, and the rest is history. Bo Nix isn't going to elevate this. Like, he's not I think people tried to look at him as maybe a Stroud or a Herbert, like in recent memory, because his EPA was decent throughout the season, but he's not elevating the players around him. And when the players around him are, no disrespect to these people, but Cortland Sutton, Marvin Mims, Troy Franklin, like not superstars, they're not going to contend against a team with a juggernaut like Josh Allen at QB.
No, I completely agree. I think what Bo Nix brings is similar to what Mac Jones brought with the Patriots that first year. Obviously, there wasn't continuity within the offensive play calling staff. In year 2, he lost Josh McDaniels, gets Matt Patricia, Bill O'Brien, then gets traded to Jacksonville, and his career is pretty much over now. I think in the case of Bo Nix, you have a little bit more continuity at that play caller position. The Denver Broncos offensive line was one of the best graded units all year. And I think the emphasis that Sean Payton has had on that offensive line is what's really going to pave the way and dictate how they operate moving forward. Bo Nix, low negative play rates, low pressure to sack ratio. He did a lot of things right in terms of protecting the ball, which is sometimes all you can ask about the quarterback. I think what you want to see him start to build on from year 1 to year 2 is where he was hitting some of these deep balls and actually pushing the ball downfield against the Cleveland Browns, against the Cincinnati Bengals, against the Chiefs backups. You want to see more of those big plays happen more often and more frequently. So that deep ball you see against the Bills, you got to see more shots like that and just willing to just rip it. And I think as he gets more comfortable at the NFL level, we might be able to see that side of Bo Nix. But he is not, I think, on the caliber of player a guy like Justin Herbert is. I think Justin Herbert's a top 10 quarterback. I think he has been for most of his career. Bo Nix, to me, seems like he's going to be like that average threshold. He's going to be the new Kirk Cousins or Derek Carr, or whatever tier you want to kind of put there. And I think that gives you a baseline as a team. And obviously the rookie contract helps you build around that. But I don't know if that's going to be something that's going to get them over the hump.
Yeah, when you were describing the negative play rate and good pressure to sack rate, Derek Carr was the name that popped into my head. I know they're quite similar on your negative play rate thing that you put out every week. Now that the season's over, it's going to be a while till we get the next one. But you would do it regularly during the season. It was always nice to see. I believe Bryce Young finished first in that. By the way, just a Bryce Young plug there. And then you talk about it, right? Comparing it to the Chargers, who are also in that division. Obviously, I think we both agree that the Chiefs are going to continue to run it for a while, so long as Mahomes and Andy Reid are both healthy and together. But it's like, what's the ceiling for both the Broncos and the Chargers? Well, despite this just incredibly horrible game from Herbert, I still think he has a much higher ceiling than Bo Nix. And all things equal, because I think the Chargers are building a good O-line as well, I think we'll be able to see that as both of their careers continue. And we saw it to a degree this year, right? Because the Chargers were one spot ahead of them in the playoff seeding. The Chargers were the 6th seed and Denver was the 7th seed. As for Denver's future, I think they can just continue to build as it is. But like we're talking about, I don't think Bo Nix can elevate them unless they have like superstars all around them in terms of receivers. But
I mean, what he did this past year with Marvin Mims, Vele, Cortland Sutton. Cortland Sutton's obviously a stud, but like those weren't like what you see like Jalen Hurts work with. Like if you were able to get an AJ Brown and Devontae Smith around Bo Nix, obviously is he the driving engine? No, but I think he might perform better than a Jalen Hurts in that situation. Obviously, you don't have the tush push factor on those 4th and shorts, but again, I think there is a element to how Bo Nix plays that isn't necessarily detrimental to being a long-time starter.
I think that's a really, really good way to put it. There's not much more to say about Bo Nix there. You bring up Jalen Hurts, and this is a really good segue because that was the next game, and this one was a tough watch on both sides of the ball. Just more bad QB play. I think again, Jalen Hurts is coming off the concussion, so he's not 100%. Maybe he physically he's probably 100%, but he hasn't played in a couple weeks, And he had a couple of nice plays. The one to Goddard, even though it's a passing touchdown for Hurts, Goddard made that play, trucking the guy, then throwing in an extra stiff arm at the end that he just didn't need to for good measure, just being disrespectful. And that was really the play that set them apart. The result was the same thing as it was in week 1, kind of how we both predicted it, but it was much lower scoring. And I think the play of Jordan Love was a big contributor to that. And granted, they lost receivers left and right in that game, but what they paid for Jordan Love, based on, let's just call it what it is, half a year of good tape, because I don't think he was very good to start, 2 seasons ago now, that first half of the year. They paid him top of the market money, and I don't think you're going to get the returns on it now that they have tape on him. That's something that came to me when I was typing up the script earlier. Maybe he was that good because there was no film on him. The last film they had was from 4 years ago at Utah State, and then sparingly when they had already clinched playoff spots and they would bench Rodgers in the last week. So I don't know where you go from here with Jordan Love making that money, but I think they can afford to bring in a superstar receiver, and I think that's the next step for them.
Yeah, no, I think it's very comparable to the Eagles pre-AJ Brown. A really good roster. You can see a bunch of different starters at a whole lot of positions. I mean, the offensive line, the wide receiving core, the defense. I mean, the amount of first-round talent. We saw Jeff Hafley turn that unit around. I mean, they looked like an inspiring unit that was actually carrying them down the stretch. They kept them in that Eagles game. And to me, that's something you can build on going into next year. But you got to find your AJ Brown. You got to find a blue chip player that's just better than the guy across from him, that can go up and make plays. And I don't think they have that. I think if Christian Watson had stayed healthy, he might have been able to get to that point, but he hasn't been able to stay healthy his entire career. Romeo Doubs has now been in and out, and it leaves it to where it's like Jayden Reed. And to me, it's like if you compare somebody with Jayden Reed It's really goes back to that A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. You want that 1-2 punch, the Jamar Chase, the T. Higgins. And when you get that dynamic duo, we saw it with the Chiefs, Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill. You need those two guys. And so that's the next step for this Packers team to elevate themselves up above and also get some key veterans in the building. I don't care if they're on a vet min deal. Get some veteran offensive linemen. Get some veteran guys in the secondary to where this isn't a young, inexperienced team. You have teachers and leaders in the building. I think that's one thing to the detriment of how Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur built this team is it is the youngest roster. And I think it's just going to take some time to grow and develop and figure out the talent that they have and how best to use it. So I think that's kind of where the Packers are going from here. Eagles, Jalen Hurts still looks uninspiring. Saquon Barkley is going up against the Rams again. So I think he is going to carry the load moving forward. But if you're the Lions in Detroit, you're going to go and play in the Super Bowl against a team like the Bills, the Ravens, or the Chiefs. In my opinion, this Eagles team is a class below those teams. And so unless something changes, unless Jalen Hurts goes on this magical turnaround run that we saw Nick Foles do a couple of years ago in an Eagles jersey, it is hard for me to get behind the Eagles as a team moving forward. The defense is great. The offensive line is great. The skill position players are great. It's really just going to come down to Jalen Hurts. He's the X factor for this Eagles team. And if he continues to play like he has been, this team is not going to make it back to the Super Bowl.
Well, and they lose Nakobe Dean for the season in that game as well, one of the starting linebackers there. So getting a little bit banged up on the defensive side there. But I agree. I think the defense is fine there. It's really going to take Hurts getting back to that, was it now 2023 level when they played the Chiefs, where he was the best quarterback in that game. It just didn't turn out that way, like toward the end, because the Chiefs made their magical run. Kadarius Toney saved their season on a punt return. So we'll have to see there. As far as the Packers go, like you're saying, this could be a Khalil Mack destination next year. Like people like that can get in and still some aged wisdom, so to speak. I don't want to call him an old head, but that's almost what Khalil Mack is nowadays. But bright future for the Packers there. I'm not too concerned about them, but Jordan Love, I think, does need to turn it around, and a star receiver will help in that regard. Now, the next game, another young QB who I don't think needs a star receiver to turn it around, but man, it would be fun. Jayden Daniels, phenomenal performance. He's been phenomenal throughout the season, and this just begs the question to me, who's he the best rookie since? Because, like, I think this rookie season is eclipsing like Andrew Luck and Camps. Like, who's been better than Jayden Daniels as a rookie?
So Pro Football Reference has this metric called approximate value, and they try to do it across all positions, but it's pretty much take team performance, separate kind of contribution out according to the players, your skill position, offensive line, defense, et cetera, et cetera. In the case of that metric for rookie years, this surpassed Cam Newton's 2011 year. I think Cam Newton had like a AV of like 19 or 20. Jayden Daniels, I think, had an AV of 21, which is really special. I think it's only behind Patrick Peterson and maybe one other player that was a non-quarterback. So a very, very special rookie year, just from like an aggregate standpoint. When you look at advanced metrics like EPA, I like going back the rookie years, like the ones you point out, and I'm not necessarily as impressed because like the supporting casts were pretty solid, but you had Dak Prescott back in 2016, obviously Luck in 2012. I think with the talent around him is very comparable, but Andrew Luck wasn't able to get past the first round. Granted, his first year in the playoffs were against the team that went on to win the Super Bowl in the Baltimore Ravens, so a little unfair from that standpoint. But there's an element to where Jayden Daniels plays the game to where I don't think I've ever seen a rookie play like this. And the only quarterback I've seen kind of play just tough as nails, like just cool, calm, and collected. Like when Jayden Daniels got on the field in multiple scenarios where it's like they need to score this drive, he did not look panicked at all. There was a 4th and 2 that they had. Play clock's winding down. He's still getting guys set, and we're under 5 seconds. Ball gets snapped. He throws a dart to Zach Ertz to continue the drive. It's just that kind of mentality I haven't seen since Patrick Mahomes in 2018. I have not seen a guy that can just take the field and it's like, oh, we need a bucket. I'm going to go get that bucket. I just haven't. Like Lamar wasn't this clutch. Josh Allen wasn't this clutch early on. And these are the elite guys that we talk about now. So with that in mind, and knowing the Lions have a bunch of defensive injuries, when we break down this matchup on Thursday, this is one that could be an absolute barn burner, because I think Jayden Daniels can go tick for tack with Ben Johnson in that offense. And we'll see if that's the case. But this is a guy playing out of his mind right now, was able to pick up the first down that pretty much iced the game for him there at the end against Tampa Bay. Kalijah Kancey had him dead to right, and he had a phenomenal game against the Washington Commanders. And I mean, just him getting that 10-yard scamper, just absolutely phenomenal. This is a guy, I can't sing his praises enough. I was quarterback 3 for me coming into this draft class. And I think the more and more I look at it, the only guy I might take above him is Drake May. And it's just because I think there's a longevity element to his career where Jayden Daniels might become injury prone if he stays this small moving forward.
For sure. Tough as nails too, like you're talking about. He took that cut to the face. They cut like because I have like a 2-screen setup here, and I was looking at my main screen, and I turned back to look at the football game. There's just blood trailing down his face. I'm like, oh my goodness, what happened? Just a little cut, no big deal. I think this is his 3rd no touchdown, no punt game of his career. Not a lot of QBs have 2 in their entire career, and he's done 3 this year.
Back to back.
Earlier in the year. Week 2 and week 3. I remember
like
talking
Giants,
about
Bengals?
I remember talking about that Bengals game, which was a barn burner as well. This was Washington's first playoff win in it's either 19 or 21 years.
2005 when they were
so 19 years now, 20 years
Bay.
now. Yeah, yep. And just phenomenal. It seems like after they exercised that franchise of its previous owner, everything just seems to be looking up for him. You got to be happy for him. I am intrigued about that game as well. I think we might be looking at a 42 to 41 kind of game in that one. I hope we get that, because we need more high-scoring games like that. There's just not much more to say about Jayden Daniels and about that offense. On Tampa Bay's side, however, because we're doing like the future outlooks of the losing teams, it's an interesting one, because we talked about what might happen if they lose, and I don't want to steal your take, because now I see it down there. But like, where do they go with the leadership there? Because they won a playoff game last year, right? I think it was Philly that they beat, and then they lost to Detroit, a very close game. A couple years ago, they won a playoff game. Back when Brady's there, they stomped Philly in because they were the 7th seed that year. But where do they go? Because I think Liam Cohen is a high head coaching candidate. Obviously, they don't want to lose him. And I think that Baker and the rest of that offense will take a step back without him next year. So what's the outlook for him?
I think for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, it goes back to my Thursday take. So obviously Tuesday take hit. Commanders pulled off the victory against the Buccaneers. But now a lot is questioning kind of Todd Bowles and his presence there. And I think what was interesting is the game plan coming into kind of that Sunday night game was the Washington Commanders' ability to take away possessions. No other team this wildcard weekend had fewer than 8 drives throughout the entire game. And that's kind of omitting or removing like kneel downs at the end of a half. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers got held to 7 drives, and the Commanders also had 7 drives. But when you're able to take drives and go 8-10 minutes downfield, get a touchdown, get a field goal, put points on the board, it limited the number of times that Baker Mayfield and this offense could see the ball, because they were extremely effective against this Commanders team. And again, I think that goes back to strategy and just understanding that, hey, we can keep everything in front of us, get all the yards that we need, and just slowly and methodically churn out clock and yards. And I thought it was brilliant. And so I think just from that standpoint, from how Todd Bowles used his timeouts to how even the defense is called in Tampa Bay, it hasn't been a bad unit, but sometimes when you blitz as much as you do, you leave yourself vulnerable and open to quarterbacks that can dissect. And Jayden Daniels has been one of the best quarterbacks against the blitz, and he showed that again on Sunday night. So a lot different angles of where you can go with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but I think it's in the best interest to kind of maintain the front office they have with Jason Light, who's done a good job at building that roster, and you promote Liam Cohen internally, and you find a different direction to go on defense, because I think that's the best way to keep Baker Mayfield at this kind of level, and that's what you need if you want to stay competitive in the NFC.
Jason Light, a fan of Patent Analytics' work on Twitter. Follow him on Twitter. I would say that the defense was quite not bad in this game, but again, no takeaways forced and no punts forced. That's not a despite how common Jayden Daniels makes it look, that's not a common thing. And when it's crunch time, it's the most important game of the year, and that's the output that the defensive-minded head coach puts forth. I'm not so sure that they can continue down this path. I think, like you talked about last week, an internal hire, which they are not foreign to, could be the solution there for Tampa Bay. They have the 19th pick in this year's draft, so they have the best pick of all the playoff teams. So good assets there, but again, they're not getting any younger on the receiver position. Chris Godwin, free agent, that kind of thing. It might be a little dicey if Liam Cohen leaves, is the point I want to make. The game yesterday
is a lot more fragile than I think it looks like from the outside, because this is a team that's won the division 3 years in a row now, dating back to before Tom Brady retired. Actually, it might even be 4. Like 4 or 5.
It's 4 or 5. I'm pretty sure it's at least 4. But yeah, again, and this is going back to we won't stay on this for too much longer, but this is a division that doesn't really have back-to-back division winners consistently. Like, I know the Saints were the first team no, it was us, right?
The Panthers were the first team.
But we had a losing record in 2014. But yeah, we three-peated them. The Saints ran it for like 4 years, and now it's Tampa Bay. So I guess there are runs in the division now that I think about it. But on to I would say the worst game of the playoff slate. Unless you're a defensive fan, then it was a very fun game to watch. Man, I said Sam Darnold can't be this bad again, right? And he was, but he wasn't missing 8 or 9 touchdowns this time. It was more so he's holding on to the ball for 6 seconds and taking sacks. He took 9 sacks, and there was a point in the game, I think it was after a 7th sack, where I saw something that said his quickest time to throw on the fastest sack he took, I guess how I want to put it, was 3.3 seconds. If you listen to Dave Canales, he wants the ball out on 2.7 seconds. That's like an average time, 2.75. Darnold was holding on to the ball forever and not finding outlets, not getting rid of the ball, not throwing it away, and creating a lot of these sacks himself. Some of them were very meme-worthy. Like, there was the one where he just ragdolled and fell over when I don't remember who it was, tackled him, got him. But this was just not a great plan or not a great game from him. This even goes back to the regular season when I think this was something you mentioned. The Vikings lose to Detroit, and then the very next week they lose to LA. Then they won every single one of their other games, but then 2 weeks ago they lose to Detroit in week 18, and then the very next week they lose to the Rams. Like, history repeated itself, and now the Vikings, who won 14 games, are out of the playoffs.
Yeah. And it's surprising, but this happened Kevin O'Connell's first year. Vikings surprise, went 14-3, had a first-round exit with a home game against the New York Giants. And maybe at some point in the second half, the Vikings should have not made Daniel Jones inactive and actually thrown him in and seen if they could have gotten a little burst there.
That was the point I brought up. People thought it was a joke, but it couldn't have been much worse, huh?
And so I think what's interesting, and this goes back to what we talked about with Darnold last week and why I'm happy that we have Bryce Young over him. Baker Mayfield has obviously looked the part in Tampa Bay, so I don't want to take anything away from him. But in regards to Darnold, this guy isn't clutch. This is a guy that has had a high negative play rate throughout the entire year. He throws interception-worthy throws on almost 4% of his passes. Sacks that are credited to his fault, he took at almost a 4% rate as well. So you're almost at 10% just between sacks and interception-worthy throws. And that's a lot. When Bryce Young, who's minimizing those plays, is around 5%, those different plays can add up. And in this case, taking 9 sacks against the Los Angeles Rams defensive line. I know Brian O'Neill going out in this game impacted him very much like Christian Darrisaw going out in the first matchup. And that's where the Rams' strength is on defense. It's on their defensive line. In their past 2 draft classes, they've drafted Kobe Turner and Byron Young last year in 2023. The top 3 sack leaders in that draft class are Will Anderson with 20.5 sacks since last year, Kobe Turner at 19.5, and Byron Young at 17. And there were tons of other edge rushers and defensive tackles taken last year. Then you go to 2024, and Braden Fisk, their second-round pick that they got from trading with the Carolina Panthers, currently leads all rookies with 9 sacks. Then you have Chop Robinson, the really, really good speed rusher that came out of Penn State for the Miami Dolphins at 6 sacks. Jonah Ellis, who had a great year with the Atlanta Falcons at 5. And Jared Verse there at 4 with 4.5. And Jared Verse had a touchdown in this game. I mean, this is an insane job by Les Snead and his ability to put together a unit that has been very special. And so when you look at what they've done on the defensive line, you look at how they've rebuilt the offensive line, it's like, at this rate, Sean McVay over the next couple of years, if he wants to add in a quarterback behind Matthew Stafford, this offense may just keep clicking. The defense may be fixed, and this may be a team that's back in title contention. And it's based off a completely different, team building script. This is not the Les Snead that we knew back several years ago that was about trading all these picks. He's now using these picks, and he's seeing some of these players develop into bona fide stars. And I think the league needs to be put on notice because this is a team that I thought really didn't have the juice. They started 1-4, and now they're 10-7 with a win against the Vikings heading to Philadelphia. They deserve a lot of props.
For sure. And the whole F them picks mantra, we think about it like, oh, he doesn't need picks. Well, during that span when he started all the first round pick trading, Les Snead, I believe, made the second most draft selections. They just weren't first round picks. So he traded those premium picks for guys that he knew could make a difference. Jalen Ramsey, Matthew Stafford. I think Von Miller was a second rounder.
Yeah.
I don't remember if they traded for or signed Odell. I can't remember about that one.
Brandon Cooks they traded for.
Yeah, Brandon Cooks. Like they did this stuff, but they were able to build the team around him. And like you're saying now, they don't have to trade those picks anymore. And he's still building a great team, one of the best drafters in the league. You talked about just the D-line. They also have Omar Spates, rookie linebacker this year, contributing a ton. Past couple of drafts in the 5th round, Kyron Williams, Puka Nacua. He knows how to get good contributors, and it's a big reason why they are still competing. I know you said they might not be a title contender, or they might be in the years to come in the future, but I guess mathematically, or in terms of probability, they're up there this year, right? Like they can still get the Super Bowl this year. On the other side, where the Vikings go from here, I think they're the most intriguing team because they have to decide between can we make Darnold better and can he get us back here, or the first round rookie QB we drafted, who is rocking the episode 3 Anakin Skywalker haircut now. Is he going to be the future now? That's the decision they have to make, because we're looking at teams like maybe the Titans want a veteran to bring in with the number 1 pick. Maybe the Steelers think, hey, if I got 10 wins with Russ, I can get 10 with Darnold, right? I think he's going to have suitors in free agency. What are you going to do? We talked about this a couple weeks ago, but now that it's over, now that their season's over, what are you going to do if you are the GM of the Vikings? What's your plan at QB?
If Darnold hadn't turned into the pumpkin he turned into down the stretch, I would say sign him to almost like a fully guaranteed 2 or 3 year deal. At that rate, you could roll him out as the starter, let JJ McCarthy come back healthy. Once JJ McCarthy is ready to go, he looks the part. Then you trade Sam Darnold to one of those teams, like you're saying, that needs a veteran quarterback, that needs that bridge guy, so to speak. And in this case, just based on his performance, I think Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi need to kind of talk about and go, okay, so we were able to take a journeyman. We were able to go win 14 games. Why do we change direction, change course from something that's worked? And so I think it's in their best interest to let Sam Darnold walk, pick up a comp pick for a future draft, sign Daniel Jones to a cheap 1-year deal, and let him be the starter if JJ McCarthy isn't 100% by week 1. I think that's the strategy, because you know what you have with Kevin O'Connell, you know what you have with Brian Flores, and there's no reason to throw a lot of money at a quarterback who just can't get it done in the clutch. And so I think it's good to pivot away from that and not lose out in spending a lot of cap money and cash on a player that might not give you the dividends and returns you're looking for.
I like it. At the very least, Daniel Jones could just be insurance for JJ McCarthy, because they did trade up 1 spot to draft him at 10. So technically they traded up for him. Top 10 pick though. They think very highly of him. He just came from across, I guess, the lake from Michigan. So they they have a lot invested in him is the point I'm trying to make. And as far as what their assets are for the future, obviously they have the lowest pick out of the 6 wildcard losers because they won 14 games. They have 4 draft picks this year, like 1, 2, 3, 4. I can count them on my hand, and only one of them, their first rounder this year, is a top 90 pick. Like they have 24, 97, 138, 159. You have to expect that they do some wheeling and dealing because you have to add more just talent for roster churn in terms of rookies over the course of every year. So they might trade back and stuff like that. But they're going to be quite strapped in terms of bringing in rookies. So I kind of like your idea of, hey, we don't need to pay Darnold Kirk Cousins type money. Not Atlanta Falcons Kirk Cousins, but like Minnesota Kirk Cousins type contracts is the point I'm trying to get at here. And yeah, maybe because I believe Darnold is a free agent, but maybe they can do a rare sign and trade or something if there's a team super interested in him this offseason. I think we're in takes territory here. I'm sticking with the NFC North. We mentioned it earlier, but I really think the Bears are a good landing spot for Mike McCarthy. I know Bears fans want Ben Johnson. I know they want Liam Cohen. But do Ben Johnson and Liam Cohen want the Bears? My answer to that is probably no. When Ben Johnson can go to the Raiders. I know the Raiders don't sound as attractive as the Bears, but Tom Brady, I think, is kind of running things there now and really wants Ben Johnson. So I think he's going to have free reign to do whatever he wants for multiple years there in Las Vegas. I think Ben Johnson could get Trent Baalke fired in Jacksonville, and I like Trevor Lawrence more than Caleb Williams. So, and Liam Cohen, I think we can expect to be the Bucs head coach if your take is correct. So I think Mike McCarthy settles into the Chicago Bears organization, which, funnily enough, is the team he beat the most during his coaching tenure. 19 times he defeated the Chicago Bears. So he knows that team in and out.
Oh, he's very familiar with the Chicago Bears. As much as Aaron Rodgers wants to say, I own you, McCarthy has a similar belt and similar claim, so to speak. But my perfect take for this week relates somewhat to the NFC North. I think all 4 home teams this weekend are going to win. So I think the Chiefs and the Bills will win in the AFC, and the Lions and the Eagles will win in the NFC. The only game that really has me torn is that Lions-Commanders game because of just the poise Jayden Daniels shows. And I think if he balls out again and they win, I might pick the Commanders to win the Super Bowl. But I'm going with kind of just what I've seen all year, how good this Lions team is just from a coaching and player standpoint. I think all the 4 home teams win, and we'll see pretty much the 1 and 2 seeds in both conferences for the conference title week.
You may or may not have too much dip on your chip there with a Washington Super Bowl win prediction.
I'm just saying, if they win the divisional round, who's stopping them? The Eagles aren't going to stop them if they just went to Detroit, and that's just my thought process. It's like Jayden Daniels might.
You know what? That's fair. And did they beat the Eagles the second matchup?
They did. It was in Washington, and they did have a lead the first go round when they were in Philly. So I think they would be the team I would pick in the NFC Championship game. But yeah, against one of the AFC teams, they may not have the juice, but we'll see.
Gotcha. I like it. Right now, I think the Ravens win versus the Bills, but otherwise, other than that, we're the same. My preseason playoff bracket that we did on our expectations episode had a Chiefs-Lions Super Bowl with the Lions winning it. So I'm still kind of leaning in that direction despite all the Lions injuries, but we will have to see. I think that's going to do it for us here. This was a bit of a longer episode breaking down all the playoff games that happened and all the coaching news that's happened. I'm sure on Thursday we'll have more coaching news to break down as well as games to preview this week in the divisional round. So be sure to follow us on Twitter, YouTube, like the video, subscribe, do what you got to do. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and we will be back on Thursday, like I said, to break down some of those matchups we're looking forward to. But until then, keep pounding.